Hello, everyone. Welcome to our ONC HTI-1 Proposed Rule Brief Overview with Questions and Answers Information Session webinar. My name is Brandon Smith with Kaufman & Associates, and will be assisting with the logistical support for this Zoom session. You can ask questions by clicking the Q&A button, which is located towards the bottom part of your screen. However, please note that there are restrictions to what questions we can answer due to the Administrative Procedure Act. Click the Q&A bubble icon, and this will pull up the Q&A box, which will open to the right side of your Zoom interface. You may also use the raise hand function under reactions, and we will unmute your line to verbally ask questions during the session. Additionally, we ask that you select the speaker view option located at the top right side of your Zoom interface. This will allow you to see the speaker as they present or share information. If you need technical assistance during this session, click the chat bubble icon at the bottom of your screen, and this will pull up the chat box open to the right side of your Zoom interface. Please type the issue into the chat box, and one of our techs will respond to you. Finally, please be aware that today's session is being recorded. Closed captions is available by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I will now turn it over to Mike Lipinski.
Thank you. Good afternoon to many of you, and also good morning to you, those on the West Coast. As you heard, we're going to do a brief overview. I'm going to try to run through that quickly, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. You can do as you were provided a Q&A feature in Zoom. Please use that, not the chat box. And then we can even go live for Q&A once the overview is done. So have a lot of my colleagues on today. It's an exciting opportunity for you to ask some questions about the rule. Many of the subject matter experts are on for various parts of the rule. So let's just jump in now. Next slide, please. So you heard some of the disclaimers before. And they're on the screen here again, if in case you weren't jotting those down. So you have them right here on the screen. Generally, we're going to do our best to recite with accuracy the proposals in the rule. However, the rule itself is the official proposals and official statements in that regard. So the other piece, again, we'll try to answer questions to the extent we're able to under the APA, which means we can only clarify or provide rationale that we've provided in the rule. Anything beyond that, we would just ask you to submit comments, and I will spend a couple minutes today, again, refreshing how to submit a comment on this rule. Next slide, please. So reminder, so this is the first rule with the HTI name change. This slide right here gives you a sense of how that works. So our prefix will be the same. We have another rule coming in the fall. Planned HTI-2. It's not named that yet, but you can anticipate it will be named that on the spring unified agenda. So that I anticipate publishing this month. And so you'll see this rule still listed with actually a target final rule date, as well as the proposed rule date the target date for the proposed HTI-2 rule. Move to the next slide, please. So why did we do this rule? Many reasons. They're discussed in the rule in the purpose section of the rule. It's in the executive summary. We'll on your screen as well, briefly go over those. So we're still implementing the 21st Century Cures Act. One of the key new parts of this rule that we haven't touched on before is the EHR reporting program. It's actually, we're going to call it the Insight. We propose to call it the Insights condition because the reporting program has to become a condition of certification for developers under the program. We're continuing to still focus on the use of API technology to allow more EHI for access, exchange, and use without special effort. So you'll see some proposals around that, including trying to make as much information as the statute says, as much of the electronic record available as possible. And then reasonable and necessary activities. The statute required the secretary to identify reasonable and necessary activities that do not constitute information blocking. So we continue to take feedback, and when we see that there are identify more or reasonable and necessary activities, we go through the rulemaking process as required by the statute to propose those and potentially codify those in regulation as well. And then in any administration, there are always priorities and goals. Many of those are made public through executive orders. And in this case, this rule focuses on, because of the public health emergency related to COVID, trying to take a data-driven approach to making data available in the future, particularly for public health. So there's some proposals as well regarding that, USCCI standard, as well as our electronic case reporting. And then advancing equity, both for underserved communities and based on racial and ethnicity grounds. So this rule, you'll see that as well in both, again, the USCCI and as with the DSI, Decision Supports Intervention criterion, and its transparency for algorithms. And then obviously we're always using our other statute, which is the HITECH Act, and trying to advance interoperability. Congress has been focused on that since establishing this agency in statute, whether it be through MACRA in terms of measuring widespread interoperability, or the 21st Century Cures Act, where they gave us a definition of interoperability as it relates to health IT. So through our certification program, we are trying to continue to advance interoperability and fulfill the duties of the national coordinator as specified in the HITECH Act. So what's in this rule, as you see on the slide, it really breaks down into 5 main categories, 4 of which are under the ONC Health IT certification program, and then information blocking, which is a larger umbrella because it doesn't focus or rely on certified health IT and involves more actors than developers of health IT. It involves certified health IT, that is, it involves healthcare providers as well as health information networks, health information exchanges. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so the first item on the list, we're going to an additionalist approach. So before we used to do like initial set of criteria, and then we went to a edition, like a year approach, and we called like the 2011, 2014, 2015 edition. So what we're going to do here now is it's an additionalist approach, really going to be driven by timelines and timeframes for the criteria and the standards. So if we move to the next slide. So this lays out what I just said, but I wanted to really move. So we'll move to the next slide. How we're going to approach this. So it's really like 2 forms of compliance for the developers in terms of when they have to update their tech to the new criteria, new standards, and then when they have to provide it to their customers, which is in most cases one and the same. And we go about this through 2 ways, through certification and then through their conditions and maintenance of certification requirements. When we get to the end, we could possibly bring up, we have a good fact sheet out there about how this works and gives you examples. I highly encourage anyone who wants to get a big picture understanding of how it would work, the regulatory requirements, because it has a lot of conditions, unless otherwise stated in this part, these are the timelines. So then you have to cross-reference otherwise stated. And so we try to do that for you in a fact sheet. So maybe we'll show that at the end here, but I highly encourage you to look at that educational resource. Moving on to the next slide. So certificating, big ticket item, right? How do we move interoperability? We do it through standards and improved in functionality of health IT, and we do that for ONC through our certification program. So next slide, please. So here's a quick, high level of what we're doing, what standards we're going to newer versions of, and then what criteria we're proposing changes for functionality. The one thing I would say when you look at this slide is some of these standards affect more criteria than you're seeing listed here. So be aware of that. We have in other presentations gone through what criteria are affected by USCCI, as well as a companion guide, which has to be updated for exchange using CCDA, and then obviously the fire standard too, which I believe now 6 is out, which you see up in the box on the right. So that's what we want to hear feedback on that. I want to point that out and identify that while we proposed 5.0.1, 6 we identified that 6 would be coming. It's out, so we really want to hear comments on that. Next slide, please. So this is the USCCI version 3. It's a finalized standard that we're proposing to use as the new baseline for certification. We're already working from a standards perspective on version 4. Comment period is closed on that. And but 3 is now what we're proposing as a baseline, and then there'll be time frames in terms of we propose in which the products have to be that have that have been certified to criteria, that have that standard in it. They have to be updated by, and then that functionality has to be provided to customers by a date as well. So you have here highlighted which criteria are new. Let's move to the next slide. So wanted to also highlight the API ones. There's really important ones here in terms of identifying a standardized approach to URLs, as well as from a privacy perspective with the patient authorization revocation. So we're standardizing that as well. So again, more standardization, whether it may not be by a standard per se, but a standardized approach to how all developers on the program have to meet these requirements. And we think these are going to be very important in terms of improving access for third-party apps, as well as, again, supporting privacy and security when using those apps. So next slide. Wanted to highlight this one. We're really seeking, there's a lot of permutations in the rule about, in the preamble of the rule about how we could go about this. And we're really looking for comment on that. There's a similar request, similar in terms of looking at how we can improve patient preferences with health IT under the information blocking section of the rule. That is more of a what's called a request for information. We'll touch on a couple of those in the next slide. Those can't necessarily become finalized. This could be any one of the permutations that we propose. So this is more important in terms of focusing on your comments. So next slide, please. These are the RFIs that I just alluded to. There's one in the information blocking one, but these are the standard focused ones. So these would be under the certification program. So we have a lot of questions there that we're seeking feedback on what we could possibly propose in a future rulemaking that then ultimately could be finalized. Next slide, please. So we'll quickly touch on DSI, taking a look at the clock with one of my eyes, just to give you guys as much time as possible to ask questions. So let's move to the next slide. So here's really just one slide of what you've probably seen. If you listened to any of our other webinars, you've seen these slides before. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them or reading over them, but we wanted to include them if this may have been your only opportunity to listen in on a webinar. So this is really what we're trying to achieve. You can move to the next slide. Again, transparency being a key prerequisite. And I want to move to the next slide just to kind of talk more about who would have to do what, in terms of a developer in the module, and whether or not they would have to identify DSI, the transparency of the algorithm that they're using. There is requirements under DSI that they will have to meet if they're getting certified to that criterion. The DSI, the algorithm transparency is a separate requirement, and that depends on if they're using those algorithms for support, for decision support and intervention, that is. Can we move to the next slide? This is a quick summary of what we think the benefits will be for patients, providers, and industry. Not going to spend much time on this again, like I said, because I want to go to the next slide because I want to zero in on some of the key questions that we're asking in the rule that you should be aware of and we're looking for feedback on. So, who should have access to these attributes? Right now, we're saying the user, but we do have questions about if they should be more broadly available. So we want you to make you aware of that. And also some more, additionally, another question in there as you see on your screen. So let's move to the next slide. Insights condition. As I mentioned, we are proposing to implement the HR reporting program with this rule, particularly the requirement that it be a condition of certification. So we can move to the next slide. So here's essentially what I've been saying a lot about this, what was required of us, and then what, we're taking a kind of an iterative approach to it. I should definitely emphasize that with the first part of meeting the HR program statutory provisions. And next slide, please, just to lay out what measures we have here. So they've kind of fall in 4 areas. They're all related to criteria that exist under the program. So you have on your left the 4 areas that I mentioned, and on your right, the criteria. And then in the middle are the 9 measures that we're proposing. And if we go to the next slide, and this is who has to report, which are the developers. There are certain criteria they have to meet to actually have to do the reporting. Obviously, we're seeking comment on that. We're hoping to make it efficient and less burdensome through a web-based approach. And then we can move to the next slide. Information blocking. I only have one slide on this one. Next slide, please. So this is in a nutshell. So there's really one definition, which is the definition of health IT developer, certified health IT, which includes offering health IT, certified health IT. So we are proposing definitions, essentially exclusions to what an offer of health IT would be. So, this was based on feedback. There's a lot of good discussion in the preamble, and we lay out various areas of what would be excluded from an offer and then wouldn't make you a developer of certified health IT for purposes of information blocking. We also propose some changes to 2 current exceptions, no new exceptions, new conditions under the exceptions, one supporting participation in TEFCA, and then 2 focused on infeasibility and 1 revision to an infeasibility one. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there are some requests for information. They're identified here on the screen, including the one I was referencing, the relationship with the patient restrictions, requested restrictions one, which is the data tagging and filtering capabilities. We can move to the next slide. So opportunities to learn more. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've done 7, this will be the 7th webinar, and each one has a slide deck, and there are recordings of it. So, and we also have 2 blog posts focused just on the rule, but we also have blog posts focused on AI and machine learning. So I would encourage you to look at those. And then I was referencing the fact sheets. I didn't talk about all the fact sheets, but I was only mentioning the update and provide one, but there are ones on a lot of those specific topics we had today. So one just on DSI and predictive models, one's on the insight condition, one on that update and provide, one on information blocking. And then there's separate spec sheets actually for each of those 9 measures that are proposed on the insight conditions. So maybe once we get to the end of this, we can put up that website so you can just see what it looks like and what's available on that website. Next slide, please. If you really want to, learn and dig in more, I think there are a couple maybe not, maybe 1 or 2 meetings left for the task force, but next week, they will actually be giving their recommendations to the full committee, and then the full committee will make a decision on endorsing those recommendations or not, and which ones, and then that will be submitted as comments on the proposed rule. So, but I believe all their past information is available also on the website. Next slide, please. So public comments. This is what the most important part about this current process, these 60 days, which are going to expire on June 20th. And so next slide, please. Why are they so important? We received over 2,000 public comments on the Cures Act rulemaking. There were significant changes based on public comment with the final rule. There's one example we have here today, which was we had proposed 2 separate definitions of HIN and HIE. We actually ended up combining them based on comments in the final rule, giving 1 definition for both terms. And we significantly changed the definition as well. So next slide will show you that. So not going to spend time on it, but you can see on the left is what we proposed and where we ended up. More of a focus aligning again with HIPAA, which we did with a lot of our proposals. Next slide, please. And how to comment. So you can get to this from our rule, or you can go directly to regulations.gov. Even from or the Federal Register, which is what this is showing you. So there are multiple ways to get here, but then you can submit a formal comment. There's a button. Next slide, please. There's a place where you can put the comments in, or you can add a file to it as well, or you can do both. And then we offer a template. So that has everything that we proposed in the rule and the Federal Register citations where you would go to find the preamble discussion of that. So you can use that to help organize your comments if you like. That's available on our website. We also have a Word version of the rule. So if you wanted to cut and paste text into your comment or into your document that you want to submit, you can do that as well. We're very supportive of that. Next slide. And then this is just the submitting process, showing you, walking you directly right through what you would need to do. And then I think that's it. Takes us to the end, and we can, any questions that still remain, happy to answer those live or in the chat. So thank you. Kate, maybe you can put up our website right now, and we can scan through that. And then I will turn it, I guess, is it Cannon or Brandon, would you do any live Q? I guess we'll, if there's any live questions, we're happy to, do that approach too while we're still working through the ones that are in the Q&A.
Sure. So Brandon, if you could send Ron S. an unmute request, he can ask his question out loud. Ron, if you'd like to ask a question, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
So this is Beth Myers. While we are waiting to see if Ron is able to unmute on his end, there was one that came in that Rachel Nelson answered that I really quickly wanted to address a little bit more in detail, because I think that it's come up a couple times. And that is the construct of the rule naming convention and that we used to do additions. This is one of these things that is a little bit wonky and very much procedural, but is actually an important change, and what we hope will be a useful and beneficial shift in how we approach our regulatory responsibility in conjunction with other federal partners and their programmatic requirements, as well as with the industry itself and how standards evolve over time. So for those of you who maybe haven't read that part yet, Rachel did put a link in the answered questions. If you look at additions, you'll see that she put the link in directly to the section that discusses this. But we have proposed to remove the addition construct from our regulatory space, which is how we used to define each new suite of technology when we adopted new criteria and updated standards. And that did result in staying aligned with certain changes in what were previously known as the EHR incentive programs as they went through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. But those have evolved pretty dramatically over time and have a slightly different focus on how they look at their different measures and their requirements. And they've also expanded some of those requirements into other programs like alternate payment models. In addition, ONC's program has evolved over time to expand our scope to more directly meet some of the other requirements that were directed to us under our originating statute, the HITECH Act. So it was to adopt certification criteria that do support CMS programs, but it was actually more broad than that. And there's quite a list of areas that we're supposed to think about and focus on, ranging from public health to research to improving safety and the quality of care. It's quite a long list of the standards we're supposed to look at and how we're supposed to consider them. So what we've done to try and recognize that change and that shift, both within our own programs, but also within CMS programs and other related programs like at HRSA, as well as within the industry and standards updates, is to remove the addition construct. So instead of every big chunk of years doing a massive overhaul of the entire system, which did require the industry to sort of do the same, right? And providers as well. We're now doing what we hope will be a more modular and more dynamic approach, which would allow us to update standards in closer to industry timelines, so that those timelines are more consistent with when the standards are ready and when the standards need to be updated. So going forward, the specific question was, what would it be called? Well, and the short answer is it would be called ONC certification criteria. And it may be that you are certified to the base edition, which is still described and still defined within the reg, and you'll see in that section that Rachel put in that we do talk about that. But otherwise, each individual criterion might be updated on the cycle that makes the most sense for that criterion. In other words, if a standard has evolved, or if there's an emerging need, like we've seen over the past several years with case reporting and COVID, which you'll see as a proposal in our current proposed rule. So we're hoping that this allows us to be more responsive, but also to make the overall update process less burdensome on both health IT developers and providers, so that there can be a scoping that allows for those updates to be made in a timely fashion, but also on a reasonable scale and reasonable scoping of those particular updates over time. So hopefully that helps. We do intend, as you'll see in that section of the reg, we talk about transparency that we would support on that, supporting how other programs can still make sure that their participants know what technology to use at any given point in time, and how we would support keeping that clear for everyone. But we do hope that it would actually reduce confusion over which edition are you supposed to use when, that you can sort of trust that your technology that has been updated and provided to you by your developer is using the most relevant standard and meeting the needs that you have.
Okay, I think I'm going to jump in now. Thanks, Beth, for that detailed explanation for folks. And I think we went into some of that type of detail too on past recordings, but you'll need to go back now and listen to that because you just heard it here as well. I'm going to answer, because I think we had two questions about this, is the comment period. Requests for extensions of the comment period. We've heard those in multiple forms now, like via email. We received a formal letter, and we are not going to extend the comment period. So I want to explain that real quickly. It's imperative for successful implementation of this rule to get to a final rule. That's the first step of implementation. And many of our proposals in this rule have, and I talked about this earlier, associated timeframes with them. And so it's important that we get to a final rule so that we provide sufficient time for developers to update, know the final policies, update to the final policies and standards, and then have sufficient time under our proposals, timeframe proposals, to implement those standards and new criteria and functionality for their customers. So we, again, are respectfully declining to extend the comment period. So comment period will end on June 20th. And then, as I mentioned also earlier, the Spring Unified Agenda, which is a online publication of all the rules and the target publication dates, that will be made available hopefully this month, and it will actually have our target date for the final rule in it. So, and I think you've heard our national coordinator talk. We're under accelerated timelines in terms of trying to get to final rules and get the functionality out to customers. So we have this rule, and then we have another rule, plus rules related to information blocking that ONC is working on as well. But the comment period for this rule, HTI-1, will end on, again, June 20th. And we really look forward to your comments on the rule to help inform the final policy. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm up. So we've got a question here. Can we describe the differences between real-world testing and the Insights program? Also, can you provide the reason purpose for the Insights requirement, as it will be a significant burden cost for EHR developers? So I think excuse me, I'll start by pointing out that the EHR reporting program was mandated by Congress in the 21st Century Cures Act, and actually represents, I believe, one of the last remaining large portions of that rule. Of that law. There's actually more in that law that we are mandated to do. But this comes to us straight from Congress. So this is how we have been directed by Congress to implement the EHR reporting program. So we are doing our best on that front. So that really is the genesis of the program. And then The other thing is in terms of the differences between the insights condition and the real world testing program, I guess I'll highlight a couple things. So first of all, the real world testing program has been in place for the last couple of years. We've actually gone through a couple cycles. And the primary difference comes down to the consistency of measures and the scale of those measures. So with real world testing, developers have the flexibility to define their measures to demonstrate interoperability and conformance, really however they see fit. We do not dictate which measures developers report on. They tell us through their real world testing plans, and then they report through their real world testing results, essentially how they implemented their real world testing plan. And this obviously creates degrees of inconsistency across developers. And some developers have complicated measures. Some developers have chosen rather simple measures. And as far as the real world testing program is concerned, both are valid so long as specific elements of the real world testing plan are there. The second difference, and of course on the insights condition, I'll wrap that thought up. On the insights condition, we are proposing, I guess, kind of top-down measures. We're proposing measures that would have to be consistently reported across developers, kind of regardless of their own thoughts on the matter. Now developers, so that will create some degree of consistency across developers. So that's the first piece, consistency. The second is really on scale. So because of the flexibility that we afforded to developers in real world testing, we know that some developers are measuring across many or most client sites. And we know that some developers are measuring across just a few client sites or a few customers. We also know that some developers are measuring for different periods of time. So we know that some developers through their real world testing plans and submission of their first year real world testing results that they have recorded data or accumulated data across the entire year or across 90-day periods or some other variable period of time. And so the insights condition will require that developers report both across all client sites, so not just a fraction, and will require that we would require that developers report for essentially what will amount to the entire year. So we do propose that developers would report data twice a year, and we'd have a phased approach. But to kind of think about this in terms of cycles, after we get through a few cycles of the insights condition, developers would essentially be collecting data over the course of 6 months and then reporting that data, and then continuing to collect those data and then reporting those data pretty much on a 6-month cycle. So I hope that answers your question. And I will kick it back to whoever needs to go next.
Sure, I can answer one live. The question was asked, could ONC explain why the content and manner exception no longer includes a content component? My concern is that sometimes some of the content can be fulfilled in the manner requested, but not all. For example, some might be available via patient portal, but the rest might need to be provided in an alternative manner, or it might be infeasible to fulfill in the alternative manner the requester wants. It seems like the proposed revision would result in this exception not being available at all if an actor can at least fulfill some of the EHI in the manner requested. Was that the intent? No, and it's actually not the proposed outcome either. The content condition of the content and manner exception is only that date limited restriction that a actor can reply to, or must respond to a request to access, exchange, or use EHI with, and then we say for the period before October 6, 2022, the EHI identified by the data elements represented in the USCDI. And then we say on and after October 6, 2022, the actor must respond to a request to access, exchange, or use EHI with electronic health information as defined in 171-102. So all we're doing is proposing to remove that USCDI portion of the content and manner exception because it is no longer applicable. It's been sort of timed out now that we're past the particular date mentioned in there. The manner condition, which is what the rest of the question appears to me to be asking about, is still available. So if an actor can provide some of the EHI via patient portal and the rest in an alternative manner, this exception is still exactly the one they would want to look to. And again, if they can't provide some of it in that alternative manner, then you could start to look to the infeasibility exception, which is still available. So if an actor can at least fulfill some of the EHI in the manner requested, this exception is still available. They should fulfill that EHI request in the manner requested and then see if the rest can be fulfilled in an alternative manner. And if not, look to another exception to cover that possible interference. I'm not sure who I'm handing it to now, but I will go on mute so that someone else can jump in to answer a question.
Hey, so this is Matt Ron with ONC in the Office of Technology. I'll take the question about the USCDI version 3 data elements, and must those also be supported by FHIR API for exchange purposes? If so, do current FHIR API IGs support those data elements? Yeah, so currently the most recent version of US Core that was released in May does align with USCDI version 3. It is currently out for an STU update because there was a discrepancy in the sex data element, but hopefully in the next few weeks to a month, there will be an update to align with the requirement for sex and the SNOMED CT applicable standard in the new upcoming US Core. It'll probably be called 6.1.0, US Core 6.1.0. So yes, the current IGs do align with USDI version 3 with one discrepancy that is hopefully going to be updated in the next couple weeks. So thank you. I'll turn it to whoever else is next.
Beth is next. I think I've got the next one. I just tagged Robert Latz at 127, and Robert, I tagged you in particular because we're going in a circle in our part of the chat where we internally tag each other for questions. And we're trying to figure out which portion of the rule you're most interested in us clarifying. So I'll mention just a couple of things that this sort of was flagging for us, and then we might ask you to either come off mute or type in a follow-up on your questions so that we can be more clear. The question, for those who might not have opened it or who found it, is asking about within acute care settings, if the EHR vendor they utilize does have certified EHR, but they have modified that EHR and using a user-defined assessment tool or a modification of an algorithm, and then what might we as providers need to give the vendor, just trying to understand the potential burden on providers. So this is, I think, might be a question about the DSI, although it sounds like we had some questions in the background of whether it was also about the insights condition with like reporting programs for measures or not. But I'm going to take it from the angle of the DSI. And I put some of this information into one of the other answers, and I will ask Jeff Smith, who is also on the phone, to follow up if I'm getting anything either incorrect or not fully responded to. But the point is whether or not the technology that is leveraging a DSI algorithm, it's about the transparency that they would have. So if you have a homegrown system, it may be that you do actually have to be clear about the documentation that has gone into that. One would sort of assume that you've done that already in developing it in the first place. But that type of information is what would be required for disclosure. But keep in mind that in the proposal, that disclosure is for the user of the DSI. So it's for the user of the Certified Health IT module. This means that it wouldn't necessarily be that you're providing this and it's going out to the whole universe. And we specifically asked some questions about that, asking about what is what should be publicly disclosed or not. Is there information that would be beneficial for research going forward to think about the quality of DSI and the fairness and how data works and how, what are some lessons learned that we're finding from these individual algorithms or machine learning constructs. So the sort of short answer is that whatever documentation you might have that has been that is consistent with what the reg requires that was used to develop that in the first place would be the type of thing that the developer would need. But keeping in mind that they would need it for the purpose of disclosing it to said user. So, and in the instance where they are in fact certifying that criterion itself for the purposes of their certification in the program. So there's a couple of dependencies there, and hopefully that kind of got at what you were asking. Again, we were going in a little bit of a circle about which thing you might be asking about. So please confirm if we've gotten it or if we've missed the boat there. And then Jeff, I think you might have a little bit more to add. So if you want to go ahead and flesh that out further, and I'll check and see if we have a follow-up note from Robert.
Yep, sure. Yeah, and I did see that Robert said that his question was related to the DSI. And I think the important dynamic here to kind of think about as a provider and as it relates to your kind of obligations or your responsibilities related to DSI, the requirements are on the certified health IT developer. And the way that we've divided the world is into algorithms, and I'll just use vernacular specific to our rule here. Predictive decision support interventions, or PDSIs, that are developed by the certified health IT developer for use in their products is one side of the line. The other side of the line are predictive DSIs that are developed by other parties and used as part of the product. When the developer of certified health IT develops a predictive DSI, they must include all of the source attributes, all of the transparency requirements that we are proposing. When the predictive DSI is developed by an other party, and this could be a health system, this could be a client, this could be another technology company, this could be, I think we mentioned, a medical publishing company. So when the predictive DSI is developed by an other party, we essentially say that the certified health IT developer should try to get that information from the other party. However, we do not assert authority over those other parties. So we would not be in a position to require a user or a health system who develops a predictive DSI to provide that transparency requirements. However, so there is some flexibility when it comes to predictive DSIs that are developed by health systems and used in their certified health IT products. But I think we try to make the case that transparency is an important thing. And I think in one of the earlier blogs that we reference in the preamble and is available on healthit.gov, we draw comparisons to Carfax. And I think big picture, we think that transparency is going to be an important role in determining and helping users determine whether a predictive DSI is fair, appropriate, valid, effective, and safe. And if information is missing, even if that information is missing from a predictive DSI developed by the home institution, if you will, not the developer itself, I think there ought to be answers to questions around why certain transparency isn't available. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thanks, Jeff. Catherine Klaus has her hand up. So Brandon can send you an unmute request, and then you'll need to unmute yourself and ask your question if you'd like to ask one out loud. Again, that's Catherine Klaus. Going once, All right, well, Vaishali, why don't we hop to you? And then if Catherine has a question, she can let us know.
Sorry, I had a lot of windows open. Just trying to find the right one. Okay, so there are a few questions that relate to the insights condition that I'm going to try to address. One question here from an anonymous relates to what happens if you miss the cycle to attest, yes or no? Will developers have enough time to attest? With regards to the timing and the frequency, the reporting of the measures, at least initially, will be phased, as we've described in the proposed rule, will be phased over 2 years. In the first year, the measures that relate to individual access, public health information exchange, and a measure specific to applications supported through certified health IT measure will be included, will be for those developers that are required to report on that, will be for year 1. And then year 2 will follow with the rest of the measures that Mike showed in his kind of overview of the measures. And then in terms of the timing or frequency of reporting, developers will have to submit measures every 6 months, and it really aligns with the current attestation condition and maintenance of certification. So the submission windows would be from April 1st to 30th, and then October 1st to 31st. And developers would have about 6 months to collect the data, another 6 months to assemble the data, and then a month in which they would, a month reporting window. So where they would, attest and report. I guess, we would welcome comments as to whether that's adequate enough time to allow for the reporting and attestation. But that's how we've, currently described it in the rule. The other question relates to, let me just scroll. Oh, yes, from Tina Tomaso. So did we hear that, right, for insights, vendors must run all analytics for all clients, must run analytics for all clients. And I would say that that really depends on the measure itself. So different measures, measures have different specifications and, relate to each measure has is associated with a particular certification criterion. So if if a certified EHR developer is qualified under the thresholds and has a product that meets that criterion, then the developer would be reporting on for the clients that are using that product or products for that criterion. So I would say it's not necessarily for all clients. It really relates to the products that one is certified to for the measure. So I would look at the measure specifications to look at that, to determine, which of the clients would be which of the clients would be included in the measure. And I think that those were the 2 questions related to insight. So I will stop here and pass it on to
me. Thanks, Vaishali. This is Cassie Weaver again, answering a question about the proposed new third-party modification use condition. And the question is about the sort of exception to the exception, or the carve out, which says the condition cannot be used by an actor who's a business associate of a healthcare provider if the request is being made by the healthcare provider. And would this also cover requests that are made by a business associate on behalf of the healthcare provider? And the answer is yes, it also covers that. In our preamble text, we noted that because this new proposed third party seeking modification use condition is not available when the request is from a healthcare provider requesting directly or through another business associate of the healthcare provider, such modification use from an actor that is its business associate. So it could be business associate of healthcare provider on behalf of healthcare provider to another business associate, in which case the exception would not be available. So I don't know who I'm handing it to now, but I will go off video and let someone else join.
All right, I think it might be me, and I'm going to take a crack at a question around for updated or new criteria, when would ONC communicate if the certification for the EHR module is to be obtained by live testing with an ATL test proctor or self-attestation? Will that be in the final rule or come later? I think we will hem pretty closely to the way that we've handled this in the past. And generally speaking, conformance methods can be done in a range of different ways. They can be done obviously through test tool or validation. They could be done through kind of demonstration or visual. They could be done through code analysis, or they could be done through self-attestation. So there's a range of options that exist. Generally, we take a look at the criterion on an individual basis and try to determine whether a test tool or self-attestation or something in between is more appropriate. And we do this as a function of kind of sub-regulatory processes. So we will not be putting this into the final rule, but this is something that we will definitely be communicating out to the community as we make determinations. So hopefully that answered your question. Thanks.
I think I will jump in and take the question from Brendan Keeler regarding, oops, there we go. Why we're extending the time period. So it is because what I said, there are time frames, key time frames in the rule. So the really good example is USCCI. So we have a time frame where we want certification to occur and updating by January 1st, 2025. So it's pretty imperative that we get the rule out, if we stick with that proposal, to get the rule out in time to give developers sufficient time to implement that. Some of what you're alluding to, I think, happens in every administration. I'm obviously can't speak for this administration or really any administration. There are regulatory ways, I think, just so other folks know what I think Brendan was talking about. There are other laws that apply to regs. So for example, there's what's called the Congressional Review Act, and it allows Congress to come back and look at major rules and essentially overturn those rules. And it's based on legislative days they're in, how far back they can go from when the rule was finalized. And it requires them to pass it similar to how they would pass a bill. And that's happened in the past by Congress, both just recently. Not this current Congress, but the one right before it. And it also happened under the Trump administration. The other thing that an agency, even if any rule that gets passed by a prior administration that the new administration doesn't agree with, can go through a process to withdraw that rule. They would, depending on when it actually publishes, they may have to do a proposed rulemaking. So this administration did that for what the prior administration did. It was called like the sunset rule. And they went through a process to propose that they were going to, essentially withdraw or overturn that rule. And then they have to just issue a final rule eventually to finalize that policy. Similarly, with like executive orders, a new administration can revise or revoke executive orders. So this administration had done that, and you've seen that with other administrations. But so that's, I believe, what was being alluded to. Some of these other laws or means for changing rules that can always occur with a new administration. But that isn't the reason why we're not extending the comment period. It is really tied to the timeframes that we proposed in the rule and what we were trying to accomplish with our proposals. Thank you.
But I think we have time for one more live question. So if somebody would like to raise their hand, we can let someone ask something verbally. Or if one of the ONC team folks wants to identify one final question to ask, we've got time for one more question.
I had a follow-up to the question I answered earlier about the third-party modification use. Would an actor be permitted to require a business associate who is making the request on behalf of a provider to prove their authority, or is the business associate self-attestation sufficient? I think it's kind of another fact-specific question. If the actor wanted to make use of that exception, then and it came to be subject of an information blocking investigation, all of the facts and circumstances would be looked at. So whether you have to prove it or not, usually there is pretty self-evident factual evidence of whether or not a contract exists between the two. So you would want to just be sure of what you were doing before you did it, but there's not any paperwork requirement or anything like that, no documentary requirement in that.
Okay, we are at, it's Mike again, and we are at 1:59. I'm going to see, still a chance if my colleagues want to jump in either to answer anything live, I'm happy to turn it over to them. Otherwise, we're probably going to be, we're at the end. Kate, can you scroll down? I just want to show folks a little more about this page and what's here for you. So like I was telling you, you can link right here. So you can click on that read and comment on the rule, can do that. There's the blog post. There's ones, like I said, just on machine learning, AI, the DSI proposal blogs. And then, as I was mentioning, each of these have a header as to what the topic of the webinar was. There's a video recording that runs through the whole presentation, and then there are slides that go with it. I am going to ask a colleague real quick. There's probably not a way to, Ken, I don't know if you know, or our other tech folks on this, to like skip ahead in the recording if you wanted to get just to a particular part. I'm not sure. I don't want to say there's something available that maybe isn't, but sometimes you can go to certain
the
parts.
recordings are going to be just like YouTube videos. So in that sense, yes. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, sometimes you can splice out and know where different things are. So I guess we obviously aren't doing that. So based on the agenda, you could probably figure out, the slides, how far in you would want to go to if you just wanted to hear something specific. But we do have like 1 hour presentations just on insights condition, 1.5, I should say, or on the DSI. Those are about 1 hour and a half, if I recall. Obviously, we finished a little bit early in each of those to allow for questions, but they're meaty if you wanted to do. If you had time on your hands and you wanted to go back and listen. I think that takes us to the end. We're a little bit past the hour. Really appreciate you showing up today, listening, and specifically, giving us questions. Hopefully, we've been able to give you responses that have been helpful, and we really look forward to your comments on the rule and reading those comments. So please try to get those in time. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye now.